of government and society. Here's the first thing. When you have a keen sense of the infinite unconditioned good, a keen sense of unconditioned justice, a keen sense of God, then everything in this world, all of our accomplishments, are under God's judgment. They're under the criterion established by God. You know something extraordinary, everybody, in the Bible? Compare it here to almost any other ancient literature. There's a tendency in almost all the other ancient cultures to apotheosize the political, to turn political leaders and rulers into gods. Look, even in ancient Rome, Julius Caesar becomes Divus Caesar, the sacred Caesar. I'm from Chicago. I know Julius Caesar. He was a canny street politician, but he becomes deified after his death. Indeed, his adopted son becomes the son of the god. Then there's the Bible. The Bible does the opposite of apotheosizing political leaders. The Bible does the opposite of deifying political arrangements. Rather, with unrelenting moral clarity, it points out the flaws and failures of its political leaders. Think of all the rogues gallery of the kings of Israel, including the greatest king of Israel, David, who is frankly presented as a murderer and an adulterer. Everything and everybody is under the judgment of God. I think it's wonderful in my country, we have the Pledge of Allegiance, and it includes the line, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, some people think that middle line, under God, that was inserted back in the 1950s, is just pious political boilerplate. It is the most essential statement of that pledge. It's true, because if we're not a nation under God, then we become self-regarding, and we can tend to open the door to different forms of totalitarianism. Thank God that we're under God's judgment, lest we become politically dangerous. Okay? That's a more negative way to formulate the principle. Let me do it positively now. When you have a keen awareness of the infinite, unconditioned good, it spurs you on to ever greater accomplishments of justice. It spurs you on to ever greater accomplishments of beauty, ever greater accomplishments of science and truth. Think of this holy longing for God as like the irritant in the oyster around which the pearl is created. Because we know that nothing in this world ever reaches to the unconditioned, we keep pressing upward, onward, more. If anyone here was educated by the Jesuits, you know about Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual principle that he called semper maior. Always greater, always greater, always more. What spurs us on to greater and greater acts of justice? Precisely our belief in God. Precisely a keen sense of God. You know, I just find rather fascinating. Look at our cultural history. Copernicus, Newton, Descartes, Aquinas, Bach, Mozart, Gandhi, Teresa of Calcutta, Dante, T.S. Eliot, George Lemaitre. People, you know, with achievements in all these different areas of human endeavor. What do they have in common? A very keen and lively sense of God, because it spurs you on, upward, upward. Let me give you a biblical image as I draw this to a close. First book of Kings, that great story of Elijah and the priests of Baal. Remember, they're up on Mount Carmel, and there's like a duel going on. Elijah says, you know, erect altars to your gods, and you call upon them. I'll erect an altar to God, and we'll see who answers. And so the priests of Baal set up the altars, and they cajole, and they beg, and they dance, and there's no answer. No fire falls. And finally, at the limit of it, they begin to cut themselves and bleed as they dance around the altars, but no fire falls. What that is, everybody, is the biblical image of idolatry. When we make something in this world absolute, what happens is we turn indestructively upon ourselves. All the energies that are meant to press us outward toward the infinite are now turned against ourselves. The cutting and bleeding of the priests of Baal is a symbol of a culture caught in an idolatrous rhythm. Think of it as Dante's Satan stuck in the ice. When Elijah calls upon God and then the fire falls, it's not just my God's bigger than your God. It's talking about this principle. Don't make something worldly into God. Rather, unleash the powers of the Spirit upward and outward toward the true God. You know, just a few weeks ago, I was in Prague, and I was giving a paper there at the university. And I'd never been to Prague before. And I told the people, honestly, though I've lived in Paris, I've lived in Rome for part of my life, I've been all over Europe. I said, I think Prague is the most beautiful city I've seen in Europe. Thank you. But I said to the people, what struck me was, and this is true in the painting and the sculpture, and especially the architecture, what's behind it but the Christian faith? What was animating all of this rich aesthetic production was precisely a keen sense of God. And they told me again and again when I was there, the faith has been knocked out of the people by communism. That even the grandparents of young kids today don't have the faith. And what's happened, of course, is a tremendous drying up of the cultural aesthetic energies of the people. I'm not surprised. Unleash the human spirit, and you do it in relation to God. Don't believe the modern lie that somehow belief in God changed the spirit. The opposite is true. It's belief in God. It's belief in God that unleashes the Spirit. Last image for you. 1979, John Paul II goes to Warsaw. It was the height of the struggle. You know, they're worried about Soviet invasion and all of that. And John Paul in the great public square in front of 1 million people began simply talking about human rights and about human dignity and about grace and about redemption. And they say the people began to chant, "We want God, we want God. We want God." For 15 minutes, 1 million people chanting it. That's how the revolution that undermined the whole Soviet Empire, that's how it began. So today, as I do a lot of work in evangelization, and yes, we know the statistics in the West about the decline of religion, and it's all true, we have to pay attention to all that. But what I see very much in my own work, especially in young people in the West, is that same cry. We want God. We want God. We want God. Because they're sensing that's the key, not only to their personal flourishing, but to the flourishing of our society. God bless you all. Thanks for listening to that.